This is part 3 of the lecture notes on chapter 9. We are going to start with the sensory system, which I mentioned this to you before, but the nervous system includes the sensory system. So the sensory system really is not a separate system from the nervous system. Typically in biology classes and anatomy classes, the nervous system includes the sensory systems, as part of it. So basically, the sensory system is a system of receptors, sensory receptors, sense organs, and that kind of thing that send information to the central nervous system so that the body can respond to that information. So there are sensory receptors called exteroceptors, and they are going to receive information from the environment, from outside the body. Vision, for example, the eyes are going to be able to see objects and send that information to the brain. The ears are going to be able to hear and send that information to the brain. The ears also function in equilibrium or balance. Touch is touch receptors in your skin. Some areas of your skin have more touch receptors than others. Your fingertips and your lips have the most concentrated touch receptors. You have a lot more sensation on your fingertips and your lips than you do, say, on your back. And then there are receptors that detect chemicals, and those are going to be for taste and smell. Gustation is another word for taste. So this is going to be regulated by taste buds on your tongue, and olfaction is another word for smell. Interoceptors monitor internal conditions. For example, there are receptors, they're pressure receptors, or they're actually called baroreceptors. I'll write that for you. That monitor blood pressure. And there are interoceptors that monitor changes in glucose and changes in pH levels. Then we have the specifically some of the sensory systems. The first one we're going to look at is the olfactory system. These are nerve endings that respond to the chemicals that produce smell, and they send that information through the olfactory nerve to one place that it goes is the limbic system, which plays a role in smell and memory and emotion. But anyway, sends that information to the brain to kind of integrate that information and tell your body what to do about it. If it's a bad smell, for example, maybe you don't put it in your mouth, So that's the olfaction is smell, and that is carried out by receptors in chemoreceptors in your nasal cavity. Now, what we're looking at here, unless I explain it to you, it's not labeled, so I'm just going to explain to you the sensory receptors that are located here and here. This is the retina of the eye. The single receptor, the one that's stimulated by a single nerve, is called a cone, and the ones that are in groups like this are called rods. The cone responds to color vision. The cone receives color sensory information. The rods are used in night vision. They only see black and white and shades of gray, you know. So the rods are important in night vision. They don't need as much light to function. And then the cones function better in bright light. And they have a lot more accuracy as far as you can see a lot more detail in your in the objects that you see with cones. So together, the rods and the cones work to give you your vision of the images that you see around you. All right, now the ear, they have the anatomy drawn of the entire ear. The outside of the ear is actually called the auricle. I guess that little concave part is called the pinnacle. I'm used to teaching anatomy, and we call that outside external ear the auricle. And then we have the auditory canal, which leads to the middle ear. And the middle ear is composed of an eardrum. And what's going to happen is sound travels through the air and water as waves. So those sound waves are going to hit that tympanic membrane or eardrum, and then vibrations are going to be sent through the bones of the middle ear. And these bones are called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Now, these bones will direct the vibrations to the circular window, which is in an area called the vestibule. And everything inside this inner ear structure, which is gray, has fluid in it. So now the sound waves are going to be traveling through fluid. The cochlea has receptors for hearing, and they send their information to the auditory nerve for hearing. And then these semicircular canals have receptors for equilibrium or balance, and they send their information to the vestibular nerve, which carries that information to the brain. Gives you information, for example, like if you're sitting upright or standing up or standing on your head or lying down. This information is received by the semicircular canals. And this actually, in anatomy, this is actually one nerve. It fuses together into one nerve called the vestibulocochlear nerve. It's an E. Vestibulocochlear nerve, which functions, it's completely connected to the ear, and it functions in equilibrium and also in hearing, in auditory signals. Now, this is more of a more detail on the cochlea. Remember, the cochlea is this looks like a snail. This part of the inner ear that functions in hearing, and the sound waves actually reach this tectorial membrane within the cochlea, and then they send their information through nerve cells to the basilar membrane. And that information gets sent. This picture, by the way, is opposite. It's set up opposite in an opposite direction of the picture on the previous page. But that information gets sent to the vestibulocochlear nerve. All right, there are also body systems that are responsible for cell maintenance. So what is it that cells need? Cells need glucose, they need oxygen, cells need chemical signals like hormones, they need enzymes, they need different nutrients, and then they need to get rid of waste. They need to get rid of all the carbon dioxide that builds up during cellular respiration and other wastes that build up. So The cell maintenance systems are the circulatory, which is your heart and your blood vessels, the respiratory, which is going to be your lungs and your respiratory tracts, the digestive, which is going to be the GI tract runs from mouth to anus, so it's going to include your stomach and your intestines. And these systems provide the nutrients and energy your cells need to live. And then the immune system protects these cells from pathogens. A little bit about the heart. The heart has its own circulatory system. The arteries that supply the heart with blood are called coronary arteries, and the veins that drain blood away from the heart are called cardiac veins. Blood vessels typically are set up like this. First of all, you have a large artery leading away from the heart. It's going to be very muscular. It's going to be under high pressure. It's going to take blood away from the heart and carry that blood through branches called arterioles until the blood finally reaches capillaries. And capillaries are so small and thin that whatever is in the capillaries that needs to get to the cells can move across the walls of the capillaries into the tissue cells. And waste can move, we can just use carbon dioxide and oxygen as an example. Oxygen will move out of the capillaries into the tissue cells. And carbon dioxide will move from the tissue cells into the capillaries. This is called internal respiration. And then all of the blood drains into venules, which all collect into veins, which are under the lowest pressure in the circulatory system. And the veins bring the blood back to the heart. So arteries away, veins toward the heart. Now we'll look at the respiratory system. Air can come in, of course, through your oral or your nasal cavity. Your nasal cavity is designed to humidify and warm the air, which allows more oxygen to be dissolved in it, and more oxygen will get to your lungs when you breathe in through your nose. That air is going to go through the pharynx or throat, and then instead of going into the esophagus, which is on the dorsal side, on this side, and then to your stomach, it's going to go past the larynx, into the trachea or windpipe, and then the trachea is going to branch off. This is the right side of the figure, even though it's the left side of the page, into the right bronchus and the left bronchus. And those will serve the right and left lungs. And the right lung has 3 lobes. So there are going to be 3 branches from the right main bronchus, 1 for each lobe. And then the left lung has 2 lobes. So there will be 2 branches from the left main bronchus. And then the diaphragm is the muscle which contracts when you breathe in and relaxes when you breathe out. And just so that you can understand that, if this is your chest or your thoracic cavity, when you exhale, that diaphragm moves up, and this is the diaphragm relaxed. So the diaphragm relaxes when you exhale, and then when you inhale, it contracts, but when the diaphragm contracts, it moves down and becomes flat. And that allows more air to enter into your chest cavity. So this is the diaphragm when it is contracted and you are inhaling. And when it is relaxed, that's when you are exhaling.